I recently visited Galerie Dior, which is the brand's museum and exhibition space. It opened in 2022 in the Avenue Montaigne number 30 in Paris. And this is also the building where Christian Dior himself worked. He used it as a studio. He also held his runway shows there. And this museum invites visitors to learn more not only about Christian Dior himself, but also about the development of the brand. In this video, I'm sharing my experience from my recent visit. I also have some recommendations for you if you're planning to go to Paris and if you want to visit the Galerie Dior. In a nutshell, do I think it's worth visiting? Yes, I do, for several reasons. First of all, if you don't know much about Christian Dior himself or also the brand or fashion in general, I think it's a very good, let's say, stepping stone into the topic. Even if you already know more, I think it's a good place to deepen your knowledge. And needless to say, it's very cool to see so many garments in real life. Just a quick side note here, this is a non-sponsored video. As I said before, I'm sharing my personal experience here from my most recent trip and also the research that I have done for this video. Before you actually visit, I highly recommend to pre-book the tickets. I actually booked my ticket well in advance, about a month before. Maybe you can do it even earlier to get the best time slot. I recommend also to take the first time slot in the morning at 11 o'clock. In general, if you're planning to visit Paris, I highly recommend to actually make an itinerary and pre-book your tickets where you can. I know this is a bit tedious, but what I noticed is that many places require you to queue up for a very long time if you haven't pre-booked a ticket. This time I visited places that are not the big ones like the Louvre or the Musée d'Orsay, and still sometimes when I didn't pre-book I had to wait for quite some time in line. So it is just better if you plan your trip, even if it's a bit of work in advance, and also pre-book the tickets. It is very easy to book these tickets online. It takes like 5 minutes. One ticket is 14 euros, which is at the moment about $15.50. And then you get that ticket via email. It has a code, you don't even need to print it, and then you can just show it when you arrive at the museum on the day. On the day of my visit, I arrived at 11, even though my ticket said 11:30. I'm usually always a bit early for these things. I hoped that I may be able to get in early, but then my hopes were crushed at the entrance. I was sent back to wait for my time slot, but this is okay. And then when I was waiting, I was also talking to some ladies in line, and then I overheard that a lot of people who didn't book tickets were actually worried if they could get in. At the moment when I was there at 11, it was about an hour of waiting time for people who didn't have tickets. So it was 2 lines. The left line was for people who didn't pre-book, and the right line was for the people who pre-booked a time slot. And I just think it's easier if you book in advance, then you don't need to worry, can I actually get in that day? Because the longer I waited, the longer the waiting time for those people without a ticket became. So it's just easier to just have this ticket and not waste your time, because you don't want to be standing in line for one museum and waste the whole day. And if you can, book the time slot right at 11, that's the earliest time slot possible, because then you have the chance to see the exhibition when it is a bit more quiet. Quiet is relative at places like this. I also mentioned this when I visited the Chanel exhibition in London, where I did another video about this. But I prefer to come to these blockbuster exhibitions or museums early, because it's still better. The longer the day goes on, the busier it gets. You might also then get tired of all the people around you. So if you can, book the slot right at 11. So as I said, I was half an hour early. I presented my ticket. I was sent back to the line. And then I wanted to be in that line that I mentioned before, the second line for people with time slots. But then a staff member came over and checked my ticket, and she said, look, your time slot is at 11:30. Can you please not wait here? Can you please walk around a bit and then come back, because your time slot is actually for 11:30 until 12, and it starts 10 minutes before that we form the line. So it kind of reminded me a bit of my experience at the Louis Vuitton exhibition and Café in Bangkok. And if you have seen that video, you know it was not really a positive thing that happened there. So I got a bit skeptical, and then I started to talk to the lady and said, like, look, I really want to see this. I don't have much time here. I pre-booked this. Will I actually be able to get in? And then she said, yeah, don't worry. I have to apologize to that lady because of that previous experience in Bangkok. I may have been a bit harsh, so I really didn't mean to actually do that. So when I realized, okay, this is a bit better organized than in Bangkok, I will just wait. There was actually another lady who had the same time slot as me, and we started chatting. So we just waited in that line, and as that staff member said before, 10 minutes before that, they started to open that line and we had already queued up. So just my tip, don't leave completely when they tell you to wait at the end, just wait where they tell you to wait, but I would stay there because the line for your time slot also starts building up, so it's better to be in front of this. But in general, I have to say it was very well organized considering how many people were waiting, and I got in, I think it was at 11:40, which is perfectly fine. So I patiently waited in line, and it actually passed quite fast, I have to say, because I was talking to the people waiting with me. Also, it was kind of funny to observe the different types of people who queue for this exhibition. There were these typical, I don't know how to say, maybe wannabe influencers, or maybe they were influencers. I don't like this term in general, but it was really, really fun to see that some people actually dressed up for visiting the place. They came dressed head to toe in Dior with all the logos. Other people had one accessory to show that they are somehow affiliated to the brand. And then you had people like me or the ladies around me. We are just interested in fashion, we appreciate it, and we really looked forward to the content at the exhibition rather than taking selfies inside. But whatever the motivation, we are all different. I think it's good if people visit museums. What they take home with them in terms of knowledge, it depends on that person. When it came to the time to enter, we had to do a quick security check, and you basically enter at the ground floor level, and then the staff members guide you through because you have to take the lift to the 3rd floor where the exhibition starts. And when you come out of the lift, you will see the Instagram famous wall with all these colorful accessories and mini dresses. It actually looks really cute, and needless to say, a lot of people stopped and took selfies. As you may know, I'm not a big fan of selfies, so I took pictures for the video. I didn't stand and photograph myself. I moved into the first room because I was actually really looking forward to what this exhibition was about. After this whole Louis Vuitton exhibition situation in Bangkok, I was a bit apprehensive, I have to admit this, because this Louis Vuitton exhibition was rather short. So I did not know, was it the same here? Was it just for this selfie wall and then you have 2 or 3 more rooms? So I was very curious, and I went into the first room where you are immediately welcomed by one of the most iconic designs by Christian Dior, and this is the bar suit. So this was already like kickstarting the whole experience, and this first room is dedicated to Christian Dior himself. What you can see is a lot of family pictures, also a lot of press releases, also magazine and newspaper articles, and there are also mannequins, as I mentioned before, the bar suit, and other outfits that you can see designed by Christian Dior from different years. So this was really cool to see. One of the most positive surprises for me was a small vitrine next to the bar suit with the Dior star. And what's really nice about the story, it is actually the original star that Christian Dior himself found on the streets of Paris in 1946, and he made it his lucky charm. So this is the original lucky charm that he used, and this symbol is still very much in use, not only in the exhibition where they, for example, used it for the videos, but also when you shop at Dior, sometimes they attach it to the paper bag, your shopping bag. So it's a very nice little detail that the brand still has this original lucky charm. I also really like to see all the pictures because I already have read quite a bit about Christian Dior. So for me, seeing the pictures was really interesting. Also watching all these videos. Needless to say, this is from a fashion nerd's perspective. Most people were focusing more on the outfits that you can see. Of course, I also looked at them too, but for me, it's also about these historic documents. I do have to say this room was a bit crowded, but I can't really blame them because they somehow have to manage all the people, and the first room of an exhibition is usually the most crowded room. Nevertheless, it was actually okay. People were pretty respectful. Also, when it came to that selfie wall, it was not that one person monopolized the place, so maybe I was lucky, but in general I didn't have a bad feeling about being in that room or in front of that selfie wall or wherever. I would have liked a bit more information in general inside the room, because I think for people who don't know much about the designer, his story, also the history of the brand, It was a lot of quotes, it was a lot of objects, but I don't really know if they really learned a lot about his story. That's just my opinion. Maybe you visited the Galerie Dior and you didn't know much about it and then you learned something. Then I would like to know about this. Then please let me know in the comments below. Also, in defense of Galerie Dior, I have to say there was a QR code placed very often throughout the exhibition for more information. As the room was a bit crowded, I saved the QR code for later and I checked it, and I have to say, they call it an app, but I actually think it's just a website with some interactive content. This is really well made because there's a lot of information, you have videos, there's even an animation of the building where you can choose the rooms. For example, you say press office and they show you where in the building was that office, and then they give you more information on it. So there is a lot of information there. I'm not sure if you really want to take the time at the exhibition with all the people around to click through that website. I did it at home, and at home it's a very good add-on to the exhibition content itself. And coming back to that building, because it's easy to forget when you are in the exhibition that this is quite a big building, and this building also grew over time, we could say, because by 1954 it already stretched over 5 buildings by then, and 1,000 people worked in that building. So you can imagine what was going on, how lively it must have been during the times of Christian Dior. So after getting to know Christian Dior himself, you are then led into the next room, which is beautifully made. It's garments designed by all the creative directors of the brand throughout time. So it starts with Christian Dior himself and ends with Maria Grazia Chiuri, the current creative director. It's really beautiful. You have these ceilings with all the flowers coming down. It's really, really nice to see all of this. And also the next room is quite Insta-worthy, I would say, because it is against the backdrop of the house in Granville, which is today also a museum about Christian Dior. I did not understand why it was Christian Dior and then one garment only by Yves Saint Laurent. Yves Saint Laurent, as you may know, took over after the sudden death of Christian Dior in 1957. Maybe there is a reason and I didn't find the information, but the room itself, even though it's this insta-kitsch, we could say, was quite nice to see. It's really beautifully made, and you can also see the budget that they invested to make this museum look really, really nice. After this, you are guided downstairs, and on the side there's like a very big vitrine. It's basically a glass wall where you can see many different outfits by various creative directors, and then you also come into the next room where they have again one garment per creative director, and behind it is a big video wall, and you can see videos of the creative director designing that dress in front of you. So yeah, it was nice, but then this was the moment where I started to worry a bit. Is this like in Bangkok with Louis Vuitton? It's more about Instagram, not so much information. We can take these pictures, or is there more? And now you can see sometimes I'm overcritical because very soon I realized that all the doubts that I had were actually not necessarily fair. Let's put it like this, because the next room was a room where you could see Christian Dior's desk, and then also on the side you had fabric swatches, and there was a sketch, and it was already kind of a teaser of what was going to come, because the next room had a glass floor and you could look down into a fitting room. And this fitting room basically looks like when Christian Dior worked there. And it's really cool because you can walk on this glass floor if you're not scared of heights. And you can really see like the scissors are there, how did everything work that day. So this was really, really cool, very realistic. And I think this would also be probably one of the first rooms where you have a bit more space on the side, where you can then check the QR code or where you can read up on the information. So this was definitely one of the highlights. You are then guided through the next room, which is about the Pret-a-Porter collections, how they launched the Pret-a-Porter collections with Miss Dior, with this shop, which has the same name as the perfume. And then the room after was about silk scarf designs, and it was kind of cool. They arranged it like in an art gallery, so you see scarf designs from different creative directors placed on the wall. And while the silk scarves were nice to look at, I actually realized something else in this room relating to not only fashion history but also beauty ideals and how they change over time, because there were two garments next to each other, a contemporary one by Maria Grazia Chiuri, and then let's say one from fashion history by Marc Bohan. And then I looked at the size of the models, and it looked as if the Bohan one was much, much bigger than the Chiuri one. And while that Bohan design next to the Chiuri garment looked so much bigger, it was actually not that big. I would say it was probably the size of a regular woman, but that model or mannequin next to it was so small, it was actually shocking to see the difference in real life. We know about this beauty ideal in the fashion industry and these crazy standards, but having it side by side was actually really shocking and very interesting. And then came the next room, and this is also another highlight. It was this really big white room. It was full of the so-called toiles, and these are these rough outlines of garments in white that are made before the actual garment is then finished. And at first I thought, okay, again, it's another Instagram wall, but two ladies were actually sitting in the middle of the room. At first I didn't see them because I focused on these displays and also the text. And then they were actually talking to all the visitors, explaining the perfume of the brand. And at the time when I reached, they were discussing how they package all the perfume bottles. And then also one of the two ladies explained the Miss Dior fragrance. And she also distributed these satin bows with the fragrance or this formula of the very first perfume that Christian Dior created. I talked about this in my other video about his sister Catherine Dior, who was the inspiration for his first fragrance. And when I smelled it, it actually smelled very different from the Miss Dior that we can buy now in all the stores. So I asked her, did the formula change? And she said, this is the first formula. This is not the formula that is still sold, which I found a bit interesting because in my opinion, Dior as a brand keeps that a bit vague. I think they still build on that fact that this was the perfume created by Christian Dior himself, but maybe this is just my opinion. But I found it very interesting. It also is very, very intense because it was an eau de parfum. And then the lady also explained to me that you can still buy this, but you have to go to a boutique and order this. So I guess this is only made as a made-to-order product or something like this. So this was actually quite interesting. And also to smell this original scent that Christian Dior came up, that was definitely one of the highlights of this whole visit. And even a few days after the visit, it actually still smells really nice. So this is a nice souvenir from the museum that I will keep. And then also the next displays followed this method of new next to old, because there was, for example, a design by Yves Saint Laurent, which I really liked, in front of a very new design by Maria Grazia Chiuri for Lady Gaga, which she wore for the Olympic Games this year in Paris. Again, it was interesting to see this old versus new. For me, it was sometimes a lot of contemporary garments. I particularly like to see the shoes that Roger Vivier designed for Christian Dior. So you could see on the one hand, all these designers, these brands, they somehow ran their own houses, but there was also some collaboration among them. So this is an interesting reminder of that. Personally, I have to say it was a bit too much on the Maria Grazia Chiuri side for me. There were many contemporary dresses, for example, the one Rihanna wears in one of their fragrance commercials. There's also the dress that Celine Dion wore for the Olympics, again, a very recent example. So I have to say it was a bit too much on this contemporary side for me, but I saw on the website that they advertised kind of a special exhibition within this exhibition where they focused on strong women personalities collaborating with Dior and Maria Grazia Chiuri. On the website they say through May 2024, but it is still going on, so I think they just extended this exhibition, and this would also explain that focus, because I checked on the website they also had other exhibitions within that exhibition, but maybe they just extended it to also showcase the garments from the Olympics, I don't know, but then it's not really a criticism that I can make. And this is the end of the exhibition, or maybe not the end of this whole experience, because you actually end at the Dior Café. And it made me smile, because if you have watched my video about the Louis Vuitton Café in Bangkok, you know what I'm going to say. In Bangkok, it didn't mean if you have tickets for the exhibition that you can also go to the café. They wanted us to queue outside and wait again. And here in Paris, you end your whole visit at the café, which is this normal thing. When you visit a museum, usually there's a café where you can sit down. Needless to say, all the tables were taken, but at least you could enter, you could see the place, and if you wanted to, you could also order something for takeaway. This was not possible in Bangkok. Even for a takeaway coffee, you need to queue again. So for me, this was actually a bit funny. I then moved on to the small museum shop. I bought some really nice postcards. I refrained from buying all the books I wanted to because I can go wild when it comes to books, and then I had to remind myself that I might have issues with my luggage later, so I just got the postcards. And then you leave almost where you started because you are back at this colorful gallery wall where you see all the accessories and also the mini outfits, so you have a second chance to take pictures, which is also nice if you're interested in this. And again, I didn't take pictures, I just wanted to leave, but I didn't have a negative feeling about it because there were some people taking pictures, but nobody was blocking each other. So I found this very respectful. Maybe this was the day when I was visiting, maybe it's Paris, which usually has such a bad reputation, but this is something that was definitely positive about it. In conclusion, I really enjoyed my visit. I also think part of it was that I pre-booked that ticket and a lot of stress was taken away from me because I didn't have to worry if I can actually enter. So I definitely recommend you do that. And I think it's a place for pretty much anyone, whether you are interested in fashion or not. There were quite a few people where I saw they are probably not that interested in fashion, usually the husbands, but also even the people who were not that interested, I'm sure they found something interesting to learn at this museum. So again, non-sponsored, but I think it's an interesting place to visit. And now I would like to hear about you. Have you been, and what was your opinion? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Or are you planning a trip to Paris and you have further questions? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you could hit that like button and if you could subscribe to my channel. If you want to read more about fashion related topics, you can also head over to my website, thepinklookbook.com, and you can also check out my fashion label Pelagona. And if you found this video interesting, you may find my other video interesting about Catherine Dior, who was the sister of Christian Dior, and where I explain how this whole Miss Dior brand name came about. Thank you very much for watching this video, and see you in the next one.